È un gran piacere, grazie mille per aver aderito a questo invito, è veramente un piacere per noi avere di nuovo ospite Dan Klein. È ormai, diciamo così, quasi una tradizione avere un seminario con lui all'inizio dell'anno ed è sempre un piacere e un privilegio. Dan insegna alla George Mason University, come sapete ha una forte tradizione nei temi della public choice, nei temi, diciamo così, di un approccio affine alle idee liberali all'economia, e si è occupato di tante cose, si è occupato nel tempo delle idee, delle convinzioni degli economisti, per esempio assieme a sua moglie Lotta Stern hanno chiarito che gli economisti hanno convinzioni un po' diverse da quelle che si pensa tipicamente, purtroppo. Si è occupato di diverse questioni applicate, a cominciare per esempio dal funzionamento della Food and Drug Administration, si è occupato di fornitura privata di beni pubblici, ma negli ultimi anni si è occupato molto e con grande profondità di questioni schiettamente teoriche, di storia del pensiero, e si è occupato anche di cercare un po' di salvare la parola liberal, la parola liberalism da usi diciamo così, non so se impropri, ma contemporanei e in tensione rispetto al significato originario di queste parole. Il tema di questa sera è, credo, è una domanda, insomma il titolo, ed è una domanda che ci siamo fatti tutti, credo, qualche volta. Perché i funzionari governativi credono che cattive politiche possano far bene? Mi cedo immediatamente la parola per rispondere a questa domanda, e siamo ben sicuri che ciascuno di noi, con esperienze, sfumature e storie diverse, poi potrà diciamo così, fornire un piccolo contributo di esperienza a questa questione. Intanto grazie ancora per essere con noi questa sera.
So it was an honor and a pleasure to be hosted by IBL and by my good friend Alberto, and thank you all for coming out tonight. So I'm an American, and the kind of institutions and dynamics, I guess, are more of an American context that I have in mind, but I suspect it will generalize a good deal to Italy and humankind in general. I have 57 slides, but I'm going to try to be pretty smooth and quick. Why do government officials believe in the goodness of bad policy? It's a good question, right? I was happy when I came up with this title. In fact, unfortunately, it was after I published the article under a crummier title. So there's the article if you want to find it on my website, but I like my new title. Yeah, so why do bad policies exist and prevail? These are some that most economists would agree are bad policies, and just say are not good, should be repealed. And I would say we liberal economists would go even further to many others that are out there. So there's really a lot of bad policy out there. Why is bad policy being put in place and persisting for so long? One type of answer is a kind of cynicism. Some people are benefiting from this. Special interests are laughing all the way to the bank at the cost to society in general. But curiously, if you meet some of the people involved, you'll find that they don't seem so dishonest. They seem rather sincere, in fact. So we continue to have this question. Now, David Hume said that it's a a just political maxim to suppose every man a knave, that is to say, kind of a cheat. Though at the same time, it appears somewhat strange that a maxim should be true in politics, which is false, in fact. Not every man is a knave. It's not even clear that most men are knaves. But when you're doing politics, you should assume it's going to be knaves. And you should do your politics accordingly. So a different interpretation is that it's not evil, but just, as it were, systematic error. Persistent error. For some reason, errors that don't get corrected, but why don't they get corrected? why aren't people prepared to learn that 2 + 2 does not equal 5? And the kinds of answers I'm going to offer are cultural. And these cultural answers, of course, apply to the population in general. I think Alberto and I and many of you would agree that there's widespread wrong thinking, wrong-headed thinking about politics and policy. So it's not just a narrow question of government officials. So there's big human psychology questions on the table here, but we are going to focus tonight on government officials. We can perhaps expand it in the Q&A. There's a wrinkle to the whole story I'm going to tell, and that's that in a government agency, sometimes new leaders can be put in at the top. Like, for example, a new government comes in and presidential appointments put new people with very different thinking at the head of an agency. And that's really outside of my main type of theorizing here, but I will come back to this as just an important, complication or different wrinkle on the whole thing. So getting down to, this kind of cultural theorizing, these are the 3 types of mechanisms I'm going to talk about: self-sorting, screening, and then something they call belief plasticity and the lock-in of certain beliefs. So starting with self-sorting, suppose that you have certain beliefs about politics and policy, beliefs about the worthiness of what a government agency is doing, and they are in conflict with that organization. So your beliefs are different than the main beliefs at, let's say, a government agency. What are your options? There are 5 options. You could depart the agency or never enter the agency or organization. 2, you could enter and try to change it. Change everybody's mind at work. Good luck. 3, you could play the cynic by getting on and supporting the goals while privately rejecting the culture, right? That's good European cynicism. I think we see that around. You could remain within the organization, but openly voice your dissenting view. Or you could embrace the culture of the organization. Well, how are those working out for you? Again, the presupposition here is that you have decided beliefs which are in conflict. So, look, you're not going to be able to change the culture. Playing the cynic is not a personally satisfying thing to do if you really don't believe in it. Openly voicing dissent will also be unpleasant for you. Embracing the culture will also be not very satisfactory because you don't agree with it. You disagree. We supposed that. And furthermore, you got to think about their side. How much are they going to tolerate if you try to change the culture? Or if you play the cynic and they can kind of tell that you don't really believe. And if you openly voice dissent, right, they might expel you. So there's a screening out, expulsion, as well as the problem of you're not wanting to, of basically you're leaving yourself. So I think the main likely thing in that case is expulsion. Because the dynamics of you're not liking it there and they're wanting to expel you because your beliefs are different are just going to interact to probably lead you out of the agency. And you were just telling me that was your experience in city government.
Exactly that.
Exactly that. Okay, so departing the organization is most likely. Now, I want to read this very nice Hayek quote, because it's something that deserves to be more familiar. And this is the start of it. It actually goes on for 4 slides. I'm not going to read all my quotes, but this one I'm going to read. The organizations we have created in the fields of labor, agriculture, housing, education, etc., have grown so complex that it takes more or less the whole of a person's time to master them. The institutional expert is frequently the only one who understands the institution's organization fully and who therefore is indispensable. almost invariably this kind of expert has one distinguishing characteristic. He is unhesitatingly in favor of the institutions on which he is expert. This is so not merely because only one who approves of the aims of the institution will have the interest and the patience to master the details, but even more because such an effort would hardly be worth the while of anybody else. The views of anybody who is not prepared to accept the principles of the existing institutions are not likely to be taken seriously and will carry no weight. As a result of this development in more and more fields of policy, nearly all the recognized experts are, almost by definition, persons who are in favor of the principles underlying the policy. The politicians who, in recommending some further development of current policies, claims that all the experts favor it is often perfectly honest, because only those who favor the development have become experts in this institutional sense, and the uncommitted economists or lawyers who oppose are not counted as experts. Once the apparatus is established, its future development will be shaped by what those who have chosen to serve it regard as its, I don't know, let's set the rest of it. its purposes or something. I don't know, I'm off the screen, but it's okay. But he captured, Hayek, it's kind of remarkable how he thought about all these things and actually did a lot of social theorizing in his liberal presentation. This is just Thomas Zaz saying, why do we lack, about the drug war, why do we lack a right we possessed in the past, to do marijuana and cocaine and what have you. These are some of the basic questions not discussed in debates on drugs. Why not? Because admission into the closed circle of officially recognized drug law experts is contingent on shunning such rude behavior. And so you must accept as a premise the justifications, essentially, for the current policy. So we see those kinds of things to support that self-sorting and screening out effect that we've talked about. Now I want to change the initial assumption and now say you don't have an opinion, you don't have a strong opinion about the government agency. Maybe it's the Agriculture Department or the Antitrust Division or the Food and Drugs or whatever it is. You don't have a strong opinion, okay? You come to the organization and you go to work, okay? I want to suggest that very often you adapt, maybe not you personally, because this is a special group, but people adapt to the prevailing culture, okay, and they fit into the group thing, right? This is the group, and this is their thing. As an individual, making a career, trying to take care of your own family and so on, your purposes depend on your situation. Individuals would believe different ideas if their situations were different. Okay, so belief structures are plastic. They are affected by the heat and pressure of everyday experience, like what makes you get on with your colleagues, what keeps you in your job, what elevates you in your job, what gets you respect at work. I've got a couple of quotations here from H.L. Mencken that are about, he was fascinated by this belief plasticity, and he tells some stories here about belief plasticity, and he's a very amusing guy. I don't know if you've heard of him. He died in 1956, but I won't read these, but maybe go back and look at them sometime. William James, the famous pragmatist philosopher, said, "You may alter your house ad libitum, but the ground plan of the first architect persists. You can make great changes, but you cannot change a Gothic church into a Doric temple." So once you start adapting, right, you kind of are on a path, all right? And I want to draw on a couple of these social psychology principles. This is from Robert Cialdini's great book, Influence. First is truths are us, that people rely on social cues, and we see this like in TV programs with canned laughter, cueing you to laugh. bartenders salting their tip jars with dollar bills, preachers seating their audience with enthusiasts in the first row. Come on, Carlo, you got to jump up and say it. Or even when hundreds of people line up in orderly fashion to partake of lethal poison, as they did in Jonestown in 1978. You know, social cues really are very powerful. And if social proof has power, certainly it can do much to reinforce the beliefs and practices of duly created government agencies. I mean, they have all this authority and sort of official validation behind all of their practices. And you can think of this as parallel to immersion in the Moonies. 4 steps. Potential recruits are first contacted individually and invited to come to a 2-day weekend workshop. These workshops are then followed by a 7-day workshop, a 12-day workshop, and finally membership. And at each of these 4 steps, of course, the people who are only half-hearted, the people who are not enthusiastic, they peel away. Either they don't get invited or they decide not to go to the next step. And so what you get are the people who are more and more into it, and so you get this intense set of social cues, right, down to the final membership. And this is exactly what happens, you know, in career and in work and in life, and I think very much in government employment. For example, these kinds of departments. And so you get also taboos and superstitions that work in those contexts. Now let's turn to Cialdini's principle of self-consistency and commitment. It's just that people fancy themselves consistent beings. And once a person has taken steps down a certain path, he is receptive to information that supports it, and turns away from information that doesn't support it. This is also known as confirmation bias. It's very well established. Adam Smith said, "The opinion which we entertain of our own character depends entirely on our judgments concerning our past conduct. It is so disagreeable to think ill of ourselves that we often purposefully turn away our view from those circumstances which might render that judgment unfavorable." So people are sort of in denial about the commitments they've made and really about the worthiness of the commitments they've made. So you think about someone, say, rising to the state medical licensing board. This is, you know, the people who decide the standards for requirements for medical licensing and so on. Such a person, for example, would have to first be a prominent member of the profession, then he would find a position in the professional association, and after gaining the confidence of influential people in the establishment, he might finally join the state licensing board. That further step-by-step immersion, just like with the Moonies. So he's then enveloped by the inner culture of the profession. Outside viewpoints are cleaved away and politely dismissed and maybe privately disparaged. Groupthink goes for all organizations, including private organizations, okay? But there are big differences. It's not like, oh, it's symmetric, and the problem's here and the problem's here, so what are you making such a fuss about government in particular for? No, there are big asymmetries. First of all, the government is far more dangerous, right? I mean, what can those big oil companies do to us? They can raise the price of gasoline, right? Whereas the government can do all sorts of things to us. It can tax us more, it can control us more, it can restrict our liberties more, it can do all sorts of stuff more. Much far-reaching coercive power. And so these theories of groupthink have been applied especially to government contexts by these thinkers, for example. But there's something even very different, else that's very different. Well, private organizations depend on voluntary support and participation. And if they're doing things wrong, the people participating will stop or complain, They cannot participate anymore, right? It's voluntary. Unless they have some sort of government thing, government privilege that forces people to buy their product or pay for their product through taxation without voluntary choice or something like that, they have to correct themselves when they have stinking beliefs. If their beliefs are really foolish and ineffective and inefficient, these mechanisms, these correction mechanisms of voluntary support and participation are going to press them towards correction. That's sort of the marketplace, but even just for charities, private charities and other private institutions that depend on voluntary participation. But the government uses coercion, and these mechanisms are much, much weaker, right? They might be pretty much entirely absent. I mean, you're going to write and say, hey, I don't like being taxed this high, or I don't, you know, and then your voice is just lost in this vast ocean of public opinion. So the government has this power of coercion that just breaks down the correction mechanisms. They can get beliefs locked in, okay? And then use their power to shut people up, to shut down competitors and opponents and critics and so on. So it's a very, very different story with government. Now I want to make an analogy with technical or technological systems. There's theories of technological problems, of bad technologies getting locked in, and these have been theorized, and I think these theories fit this cultural story quite well. So what's a famous example for the technology story? It's different gauges of railroad. You know, you could have this smaller gauge or this larger gauge. And once one of these gauges starts to get used in a system, it'll tend to perpetuate itself. It'll get locked in. Now, the one that first gets started might not be the better one. It might be the worst one. But even if you got the bad one started, it might persist and not be corrected for some of these special reasons here. These are some other examples of different systems or standards. We've got this ridiculous system in the we Anglophile types of feet. Like, I don't even know how many ounces are in a pound or how many feet are in a mile. Like, I couldn't even tell you. It's a really stupid system, but it got locked in, right? And keyboard has been complained in this way. So this is path dependence and lock-in, and this guy, Paul David, has theorized about it, and I want to follow his thinking. Now, he's kind of an interventionist, in fact, on this matter of technology, and when it actually comes to technology, I don't think the case for government intervention is at all strong, as these free market economists have shown. I won't go into that, but I want to say I do like Paul David's theory for our topic, right? The culture, particularly within a government agency. So I'll draw on him. And he lays out three key features. Three key features. Again, he has railroad gauges in mind, but I'm going to take these three features and do them for the culture. First, quasi-irreversibility. That means that once you start investing in a way of thinking and the practices that go with it, it's hard to just reverse those investments. You know, it's just like it's hard once you lay down this track to like say, oh, now we're going to switch to this track, right? There's a lot of investment you've made that you don't get back if you decide to change. It's sunk cost or quasi-sunk, partly sunk. You know, obviously some of it is done, like you still got the root and you've cleared the ground and graded the ground. So it's only quasi, but still there's some that's irreversible. That's feature one. And I think that's true of beliefs. Technical interrelatedness. That is that if I'm working on this system, that gives you an incentive to work on the same system, because then we can work together. And the more people out there who are using the system makes it more attractive for me to use that system. And if you think about it, that makes it self-reinforcing, because then I join the crowd that incents other people,
and people start going to that other system, just like our stupid system of 16 ounces to a pound, and how many pints and quarts and gallons, I don't even know. But we keep doing it. And then the other one is economies of scale, which is that the more people in this system, the easier it is to just teach someone the new system, because there's so many people to inform them and reinforce how it works. So these are Paul David's theories, and all of these things I think apply beautifully to the cultural theory that we're talking about, particularly in the government agency. Yeah, so we've got all these mechanisms here, and all of these things now lead us to expect a quite uniform kind of culture within the agency. Maybe there's some private cynicism and dissent, but it's quiet. Mostly a very uniform culture. Now, what kind of culture will it be? I've made a bunch of arguments about uniformity, but what? What kind of culture? What kind of beliefs? And I want to suggest that actually there are ways to generalize about it. So that in terms of the genealogy, if you will, of organizational culture, origins and incentives, I think, give us ground for generalizing here. Two principles. First, what I'm calling the self-exaltation principle. Everyone has an incentive to exalt themselves, kind of morally. Everyone wants more comfort and wealth. Almost everyone wants recognition, power, eminence, prestige. We want a sense of significance, importance. We want to feel important. We feel important when we can believe a story in which we get to play the hero and go around and tell that story to everybody we meet. We want to take credit. I mean, that's just like you and me, right? We're like the liberal hero. We want to be the liberal heroes. We're no better than anyone. Anyway, we want to take credit for both the good and the greatness achieved. So this principle will lead to tend to lead to a glorification of the agencies that people work for. They'll find prestige in their position. They'll come to find legitimacy as well. They like to see their agency's actions as the cause of achievement and themselves the cause of the agency's actions. This would be part of a person's sacred beliefs, to use Jonathan Haidt's expression. Okay? And so what does this lead to? Well, it's a belief in the agency, it's a belief in its mission and its activities, and hence favor for the pursuit of expanded power of the agency and the government, and reluctance to surrender it. So, and then the second principle is what I call the founding principle, okay? And the founding of any path-dependent process gives a foothold to what, to what path is going to develop. So what is the founding? What is that first foothold? It's a story about how social affairs needed governmentalization, that is to say, either government control or government ownership. So the founding theory was that liberal arrangements had failed and the government was needed. So we liberals are likely to see badness persisting in the cultural system, since those agencies were founded to abridge liberal arrangements. That's what got a foothold. So these two principles then, I suggest, tell us what kind of cultures to expect. And I think they're well supported in, if we look around at what the government agencies do and believe in. Pro-governmentalization attitudes. Here's a quote from a couple scholars from years ago. It's just saying that the established school of writers are, in fact, they say they're all for the public good, but underneath it they're dedicated to hierarchical control and the formalization of education. They're speaking of the teachers' unions and such. And so all of this put together now, we do have theories of why bad policies persist. okay? And it's kind of like the poles of a teepee frame. They're sort of supporting each other. They're not all independently grounded. Like we're saying this teepee is a bad thing, so why is it standing? It's not really being supported or raised up by something else. It's that we've got all these poles kind of supporting each other. I like this quote, I gotta share it. How is the world ruled, that he wrote during World War I, how is the world ruled and led to war? Diplomats lie to journalists and believe those lies when they see them in print. So they do kind of come to believe it. They do actually believe in this sacred beliefs and the selfhood and the whole story that they're living out. At least often. Maybe more in America. Mencken said, and they are not the less quacks when they happen to be quite honest. So he's saying they're quacks, but they can be honest, like they actually believe their quackery. I've got to read this from Jefferson. It would be dangerous delusion or confidence in the men of our choice to silence our fears for the safety of our rights. That confidence is everywhere the parent of despotism. Free government is founded in jealousy and not in confidence. It is jealousy and not confidence which prescribes limited constitutions to bind down those whom we are obliged to trust with power. That's kind of like the Hume quote from the beginning. We got to assume they're knaves. Don't have any confidence in their not being knaves. So bind them down as best you can. Is there hope here? Generally speaking, it's insulation from criticism which sustains these bad cultures, and we all know that communications are a lot more powerful in a lot of respects anyway. So maybe we can criticize and working it out despite those agencies. I think of marijuana liberalization in the United States. That's been a very successful and, optimistic experience. So it's not a lockstep formula. It's not ironclad logic that I'm telling you. There are other features. And then there's this issue about political appointments at the top. The Trump administration has actually made some quite good, I would say, personnel choices and inserted people, into tops of agencies who are very different from probably the rank and file of almost the entire agency below them. And so you can obviously get a different source of selection and beliefs, inserting the beliefs, even challenge of these dominant theories from political appointments under special conditions, I guess you could say. And so now we have people at the top, often at odds with the staff. Reform is still very difficult, and you have all sorts of conflicts within the organization. But even if we can't change it, I think it's good to understand that all this is how it tends to work, just so we understand what's going on and we kind of can know what not to put too much faith in and not to expect too much and be kind of ironic about, how the world is around us. Yeah, that's it. That's a lot.